Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
And Joe, when we left off in the last episode, we were talking about the historic shift of USC and UCLA from the Pac-12 to the Big Ten. And, of course, this was driven by football. And it got me excited about Auburn football recruiting for the first time in a while. There hasn't been a whole lot to be excited about in the last couple of years. One of the big things, the big knocks people have had on Bryan Harsin. But, for all of the Auburn faithful out there, I do want to put out that in the last week, it's been a really good week for Harsin on the recruiting trail. And more specifically, really good that he got the number one ranked position players at wide receiver and running back in the state of Alabama, which is huge because, Joe, one thing I noticed, and it goes back to Gus Malzahn when he was at Auburn, is that I felt like the in-state recruiting for Auburn was really taking a hit. The top ranked guys in Alabama, I feel like I was always seeing them go to Alabama or they were going to Georgia. A lot of times Tennessee was getting a bunch of them, Florida, LSU. And even Ole Miss has made a move to get a lot of them lately since Lane Kiffin's been there. And it's something that really they had fallen apart in Auburn was they were not getting the top ranked guys in the state. And in this last week, they got wide receiver Karmello English, who he's a 4-star, but he's the number one ranked receiver in the state of Alabama. And more importantly, I think he comes from Phenix City High School, which has been a powerhouse lately. They've won a couple state championships. And especially at wide receiver, they've had 2 out of the last 4 years, 5-star wide receivers signed with Clemson, including Justin Ross, who we all know how excellent he can be when he's healthy. And this is a really big move. He's not the biggest guy, but he's got really good stats. So he's 5'11", 175, but last season he got over 1,000 yards and 22 touchdowns.
It sounds like he'll have a lot of speed too. And I think he'll probably be a dynamic playmaker at the next level.
That's right, Joe. I mean, he's a guy that you can use if you want to do sweep plays. He's really fast. I think he's a solid kick returner. That's one of the ways that he's used. And I've also heard that he's very good in 50-50 balls. Even though he's that small, he goes up and gets a lot of passes. And, I mean, we've seen it lately. It's not as important, I feel like, in the NFL for you to be the 6'5" receiver anymore. You're seeing a lot of guys under, 6 feet tall that are making a big difference. I mean, hey, look at Elijah Moore and what he did at Ole Miss. I mean, he's a guy who's maybe 5'9", and he's just been amazing. And of course, it started with Steve Smith, I feel like, so long ago, Wes Welker. And now you're just seeing, from Tyreek Hill on, all kinds of really good receivers that are under 6 feet tall. So I wouldn't say that's a huge knock against him.
No. I mean, a highly regarded player, should have a lot of speed, bring a lot to the table. And, obviously you're going to talk about the running back prospect too, but, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk, a little bit too about kind of the in-state recruiting phenomenon. And I totally understand that frustration. If you're an Auburn fan, you want to get those high-profile in-state recruits, the 4- and 5-star guys, because I think about it like from the Ole Miss perspective. You look back at the whiffs that you had in recruiting, and I think about 2 guys that I always come back to are the Cam Akers of the world and the Kobe Deans of the world. They go to Georgia or Florida State. Like, that definitely feels like a huge missed opportunity when you think about what those players did, obviously, at their respective schools. And so it's definitely a huge to be able to bring those guys or keep those guys home.
That's right, Joe. And it's even more important when you're talking about someone that's from Phenix City. It's 30 minutes from Auburn. That's a player that you should have the first dibs on. Every single time he comes out, you should be the favorite to get him, and you should get most of those kind of players. And that was something I really hated under Gus Malzahn. I felt like there were all these great players out of Auburn High School. They had become a power in football. We were never getting any of them. Phenix City suddenly rose from the ashes and now is one of the best programs in Alabama, and we didn't get any of their players. Justin Ross, I mean, I remember thinking, we have to get this guy. How are we not going to get this guy? And then when he went to Clemson, it blew my mind. I know how good Clemson's been, but someone from Phenix City is not someone that should be going to Clemson. And so, switching from what Karmello English is to now switching over to Jeremiah Cobb, he's a 4-star running back, but he's the number one ranked running back in the state of Alabama, plays at Montgomery Catholic. Montgomery's 45 minutes from Auburn. A lot of people actually live in Auburn and commute to Montgomery every day to work. So Montgomery players are also players that Auburn should be getting first over anyone else in the state. And so that's also a really positive sign for me when you're not talking about just getting the number one ranked players in their position. You're getting in-state players, and you're getting in-state players that are within the 45-minute drive from you, which is players that you should always get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it definitely is big for recruiting. And then also it kind of, gives you some momentum to build upon with Bryan Harsin, because there was a lot of questions about his future, a few months ago. Like, Auburn's kind of hoping to pull like a Ole Miss with Mike Bianco and just completely pull that 180, with the persona for next season.
Well, if anybody can do it, it's Auburn, because as frustrating as it is, I feel like every time people think we're terrible, that's when we end up being good, and vice versa. So if history serves right, this should be a year where we actually do well. But speaking of doing well, Joe, Jeremiah Cobb is someone that I feel like from a body standpoint and a stat standpoint is even more exciting to me even than Karmello English is. English was more exciting about the fact that it had been a very long time since Auburn had gotten the number one ranked wide receiver in the state. I believe the last time they did it, Joe, was actually Sammy Coates. And Sammy Coates a long time ago. I mean, of course, he played on Auburn's national championship team that lost to Florida State in the game and was a big part of that team for many years. But since then, they haven't got anybody that was the number one guy in the state of Alabama. And so that's a big deal. We're talking 10 years of recruiting. So that's solid. But with Cobb, I feel like you're getting a more seasoned player. Last year, as a junior, he rushed for 2,163 yards with 22 touchdowns. Rushing for over 2,000 yards in high school is difficult. You don't have many games. I think the Montgomery Catholic is in one of the higher levels of Alabama football, so he's not going against poor competition. And he also, Joe, had over 500 yards receiving and 8 touchdowns in the receiving game. So he's a versatile guy. I think he also returns kicks. And I've actually, of course, people always throw these huge, comparisons out there early that's, not warranted yet because you don't see where they're going. But a lot of people compare him to Alvin Kamara. That's what the word is out there on the street. So we'll see if he can even be, an upteenth as good as Alvin Kamara. I'm very excited about him.
Yeah, that's really encouraging. And, when I look at these high school prospects, I'd still obviously want to hear that somebody has potential, but I've always evaluated players in the sense that I want to see the stats in high school too. Like, I don't want you to show me a running back, that has 700 rushing yards and everybody's like, oh, wait till they get to the next level, they'll be fine. Like, I really like it when that guy, has that 1,500 yard or 2,000 yard rushing season. That makes me feel like, they're a proven player.
Yeah, that's the way I feel too, Joe. I mean, when you see a guy that has 2,100 rushing yards in a high school season, that tells me the guy's really good. I can look at, different things. Size-wise, he's fine. He's 5'11", 190. You got to imagine that by the time he gets to Auburn and plays his first game, they'll add 20, 30 pounds onto him. So you're probably looking at a guy that's going to be in the 215, 220 range by the time he plays his first football game, I would think. But when you look at the 2,100 rushing yards, I mean, those are the kind of things people like Derrick Henry did in high school. Derrick Henry, of course, it was nuts. I think he had like 3,000 yards rushing in high school. And that was when not only did you look at his body, you looked at his stats, you knew the guy was going to be incredible from day one. And, when it comes to running backs, you can see a freshman running back be a lot more stellar than a wide receiver generally. I don't think of many times that freshman wide receivers have really been the best player on the field. It doesn't happen very often. But with running backs, it's pretty instant a lot of times. I mean, in Auburn, we've seen it many times. I mean, just look at the way Tank Bigsby was as a freshman. I think he was better as a freshman than he was as a sophomore last year in a lot of ways. And so, this is also really good for Auburn when you think about the fact that assuming Tank Bigsby has a good year this year, he's probably gone at the end of the year. I mean, I think as a running back, if he gets a top 3 or I would say a top 3 round grade, I would think he's probably gone being a running back. So I think that's really, important to sign someone like this after you got Tank Bigsby going.
Yeah, I would think so. And, while there's not going to be the pressure for him to be the guy this year, it sounds like he certainly could be the guy if needed to be. And you're right. Running backs are able to kind of burst on the scene a lot easier. not only in college, but also at the professional ranks. Whereas receivers, seems like as freshmen, they usually can't be the number one option. And it usually, if you see a freshman receiver show up and show out, it's usually because you've got like a really good number one or number two ahead of them.
I mean, Joe, think about this. I mean, Devontae Smith didn't even really do anything for Alabama until he caught the game-winning catch against Georgia in the national championship game. And I would say right now, Devontae Smith has a clear right to being the greatest wide receiver in the history of college football.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people didn't know who he was until that moment.
Yeah, and so he burst out the scene then because he didn't get a chance to play because he was a freshman. And I know that's Alabama, but that's really, even, taking Alabama aside, that's pretty common that you see these amazing wide receivers not really show out until the very end of their freshman year or until their sophomore year. Seth Williams is probably the most recent one we had at Auburn that was excellent. And he didn't really show out till the second half of his freshman year. And he was leaps and bounds above any wide receiver we've had at Auburn probably in the last 7 or 8 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. A lot of times you'll see that, some glimpses in the freshman year, and then when they get to that sophomore year, you kind of see them burst out more.
That's right. So, I mean, this is very exciting for Auburn. And I think, especially when you're talking about the running back position, and you think about the fact that when Tank leaves at the end of this year, presumably, Jarquez Hunter is a very good number 2 running back. He can be number 1, and he can have this guy be his number 2 and an understudy. And that's a very good, line of ascension right there.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, Joe. Well, switching over to Wimbledon now. We just got concluded last week. And, Joe, I hate it. This is normally something I would have been way more excited about. But for a lot of reasons, this is probably one of the more lackluster Wimbledons I've ever seen. And it started a couple months ago, and you and I talked about it on this show, with the decision of Wimbledon to not allow Russian athletes to participate. And I know this is a loaded subject. What's happening in Ukraine right now is terrible, but that's not Medvedev that's doing that. It's not Maria Sharapova that's doing that. It's not these Russian athletes. They have nothing to do with the decisions that are being made. They're not out there fighting in a battle. They're just people that live in a country. And you know what? I mean, people do bad things in America. The politicians do. People do bad things in England. It doesn't mean that you should restrict their athletes from playing in events. And I hate it because from everything I know about Daniil Medvedev, he's a great guy. And he didn't get to play in this. And he's a guy that was number 1 in the world, Joe. He had ascended to being number 1 in the world. He had passed Novak Djokovic, and he wasn't allowed to play in this event.
Mm-hmm. No, that definitely took away a lot from it, not having those athletes eligible. And then for me, I know you'll talk more about it, but I was just hoping for that Djokovic Nadal final, and the fact that we didn't see that, to me, really just kind of sucked the air out of the room as far as the intrigue.
It really did, Joe. And it was even more disappointing about it is, for those of you who don't know, Nadal got injured. I would say probably during this match, but he played a 5-set match with Fritz from America, who is ranked number 11 in the world as an American male tennis player, which we haven't had many people even close to that lately. And he went 5 sets toe-to-toe with Nadal. I watched a lot of this match, really tight, and Nadal had to beat him in a 5th set tiebreaker. And I think that all of that effort probably led to what happened, which was Nadal had tearing in his abdomen near where his chest meets in a muscle. And it wasn't huge tearing, but it was enough to where, he started feeling it the next day, and the doctor told him it would be stupid for him to play. And so you had Nadal playing Nick Kyrgios in the semifinals, and Kyrgios is a fine tennis player. He's been to a major final before, but he's a guy that hadn't really done much lately. And he had this great run through Wimbledon, but everybody knew that he had no chance against Djokovic. And to be honest, he wasn't going to have any chance against Nadal either. And so it was upsetting. You had everything set up to where you could get Nadal and Djokovic. You already had, coming into this, Joe, a lot of the great players not playing. I mentioned Medvedev, number 1 in the world, couldn't play because he's Russian. And then, of course, talked about on the show before, the really upsetting and sad injury that Zverev had against Nadal, in the French Open. And so Zverev, of course, is still on the mend, and I don't know when he's going to get back out there. So really everything opened up for Djokovic, and the only person out there that could beat him was Nadal. And when he got injured, all of a sudden it was just, who are you going to put up there to get their teeth kicked in by Djokovic?
Yeah, it was all just kind of matter of fact at that point. Felt so much like a foregone conclusion. Just like you said, completely cleared the way from him. Took away a lot of the intrigue. I always try to either tune in to a portion of Wimbledon final or kind of follow it more closely. But as soon as Nadal was out of it, I was pretty much dialed out myself.
Well, it's and you and I last year watched Berrettini play Djokovic in the final. And that one was exciting because Berrettini is an excellent tennis player. And he's someone that hasn't won a major yet, but I know he's going to win one at some point. He'll break through at some point and win one. And Kyrgios is someone that I never had any expectation he would win a major.
Yeah. And I think another factor that made this one harder for me and probably a lot of people was the fact that Nadal just had to pull out. It would have been different for me maybe if he had lost an epic semifinal match, but it just kind of felt like it was a hollow, just kind of handoff to Djokovic.
Yeah, Joe. And what's even more upsetting for me is if I had known this was going to happen, I never cheer against Nadal. I would have rather seen Fritz win. I haven't seen an American even play in a final in a long time. And the last American who won a major in men's tennis was Andy Roddick in 2001. We're talking 21 years since an American man won a major. If this was going to happen to Nadal, I wish Fritz just would have beaten him so that Fritz would have had a chance, because I would have taken Fritz over Kyrgios too, and I think he would have given Djokovic a better run, I think.
I got you. So it's almost like Nadal's win did nothing for the competition.
Yeah, exactly. And Nadal's win ended up taking himself out. It took Fritz out. And it made it to where Djokovic is playing someone who's not even ranked in the top 30 in the world for a Wimbledon final.
Right.
But, it's not Djokovic's fault who he plays. He beat everybody he had in front of him. And now he's yet again one major behind Nadal. And so now we've got Nadal at 22 and Djokovic at 21. And hopefully Nadal gets healed in time for the U.S. Open, because that'll be a lot of intrigue right there to see if Djokovic ties him, if Nadal wins and gets another 2 up, or if maybe someone else comes out of nowhere to win the U.S. Open.
Now, is Djokovic playing in the U.S. Open? I thought I had read that with his vaccination status, he may still be ineligible.
Joe, I'm not really sure about that one yet, but I will say I'm sure they'll do everything they can to make sure he can play.
Okay.
Because, I know he missed out on the Australian Open because of that, and that's why Nadal was able to break the tie earlier this year. But I wonder I don't know what they're going to do on that, Joe. That's interesting because obviously the COVID restrictions in the U.S. have gone down, but lately there's been talk about how it's on the uprise. So that'll be an interesting story to follow.
Yeah.
And Joe, switching to the women's side of this, we talked about in the men's how you had so many heavy hitters not in it, with Medvedev, with Zverev, Nadal getting pulled out because of an injury. It was just as bad on the women's side. Iga Swiatek was the clear number one in the world, was dominant. She was dominant on a level that even Djokovic and Nadal haven't really been lately. And she loses in the first couple rounds, just a complete shocker. And then Coco Gauff, who, of course, Swiatek beat to win the French Open in the last major. Gauff was starting to finally look like she was realizing her potential, right? We hyped this. Everybody's been comparing her to Serena Williams. She still hasn't broken through and won that major yet. She made it to the final in the French Open, got destroyed by Swiatek, not even close. And Coco Gauff goes out early too. She loses to Anna Mazova, who's an American player. And suddenly you're without Swiatek and Gauff, and they lost a lot of the star power there. And the final ends up being, Elena Rybikina beating Jabeur, which I kind of like Jabeur because she's a player from a country that is you never associated with tennis. That's actually a very growing country that's got a lot of cool things to offer. I've heard it's a beautiful beach and kind of a growing country in the Middle Eastern area that not a lot of people think about, and that's Tunisia. So Jabeur is someone who's kind of, growing the Tunisia brand a little bit. And I kind of like her style of play, but she loses to someone from a country that you also wouldn't associate with tennis, and that's Kazakhstan. So Rybakina is the first Kazakhstani-born player to win a major. And so that's cool. I mean, whoever won that was going to be someone that represents their country and gets something for their country that you had never seen before.
Yeah, definitely cool to see, like a new winner, getting that title. And also, was it in straight sets? I think I saw.
Yeah, that's right. Best 2 out of 3, and she won straight sets. And Jabor's a solid player. She's ranked number 3 in the world and has been someone that's been ascending a lot. So it really didn't shock me to see her there. Rybikina was someone who kind of came out of nowhere, though. So that was a surprising result. Although I feel like Wimbledon and women's tennis the last couple of years has yielded a lot of surprising upsets. I mean, you think about Emma Raducanu last year winning it. She wasn't even ranked. And it was really exciting also because she's British. And so her winning Wimbledon as an unranked British player was just amazing. And that was a cool story that added a lot on. I'm sure this is one where you're having kind of a lower ranked person that's not adding as much intrigue. But I do still think that even though it's not a British player, it's really pretty exciting for a country like Kazakhstan to now have a major winner.
Oh, yeah. Like, I can't imagine what the celebration's like for them.
But, Joe, what's interesting, though, is with Rybakina, I don't know exactly how this works, but she was born in Moscow in Russia and at some point immigrated to Kazakhstan. But I've also heard that maybe she still has a house in Russia, and there's a lot of talks about where she actually lives. And I can only imagine if it turns out that there is a real question of citizenship with her and she's actually a Russian citizen, how upset people like Medvedev are going to be that she was allowed to play and they weren't.
That'd definitely be a very fascinating retroactive story if that were to be a turn of events.
Because, I mean, in my mind, it seems strange that someone would move from Moscow to Kazakhstan. So that's questionable to me. I'm not saying it's not wrong, but yeah, that would be interesting to see if that happens later, that it turns out that maybe she found a way to get around this.
Have you ever seen anybody stripped of a tennis title like that in any situation?
I haven't, Joe. I mean, the closest thing that I can think about was when Djokovic wasn't allowed to play in the Australian Open. I know that with Sharapova, they forbid her from competing due to the steroids issue. And I don't know whether they took away championships she won or not. That would be the only one that I can maybe think that was the case.
Gotcha.
So that'd be an interesting thing to follow in the future if it turns out that maybe she was, dipping around the citizenship laws to get in.
Yeah, for sure.
Which, wouldn't that be so fitting for Wimbledon, for that to be the case, is that actually a Russian won one, then they wouldn't let them play in it.
Yeah, that would be really ironic.
It would be. And I would love it because I think that was a completely wrong thing for Wimbledon to do, to not allow Russian tennis players into that event.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see, Joe. Yet another major goes by without Coco Gauff winning. She's got one more chance at the U.S. Open this year. I think if there was going to be her winning her first major this year, with her being an American and being, kind of what we're hoping to be the next Serena Williams, this would be the one I'd like to see her win.
It'd be a good place to do it right there. Prime time in New York.
That's right. So we'll see. And we'll talk more about that when that comes up. And good luck to Coco Gauff. Hopefully Nadal gets healthy in time for it. And I'm really hoping that Zverev can make it back for next season's majors. I don't see him even being able to sniff at playing in a major this year, but he's such an excellent tennis player and just seems like such a great guy. I hope he can play in the majors next season. And
right.
With that being said, I want to thank everybody for listening tonight. You can catch all of our episodes on Spotify. You can also listen and watch our old videos on YouTube and subscribe to our channel. And you can also like us on Facebook and follow us at Twitter at DJ Sports Show. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.